Hi, I'm Gemma Lauren Krebs, author of the Locked series, here to read you my book, Nothing Lost, which is available on Amazon.com if you're interested. But I'm reading you the book chapter by chapter. Today is chapter 4. You can follow me at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The videos will be here on Facebook at Gemma Lauren Krebs and at the Locked series. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and let's get into chapter 4. Chapter 4, Wild Soul. After the time watcher had shown I was nearly late the morning of the matching ceremony, I hastily tossed my tunic and leggings aside and entered my washroom. I'd fallen into bed last night and still stunk from training. Hot springs on the island were so plentiful that we were able to divert their warm water to the baths of the palace. Not all rooms had them, but most did. There were no steps into the fairly deep water. I hissed, lowering myself into the steaming pool. Sighing as heat seeped into my skin, I dipped my head beneath the water, rubbing my face and scalp to remove sweat. I scooped a handful of soap flakes from their golden bowl at the pool's edge. After scrubbing down quickly, I basked in the soothing water for just a moment more, then forced myself out and tore a robe from my closet, dressing. The dark gray material slid smoothly over my head, and I cinched a rope belt around my waist. My new knee boots were a few years old, but the skin they were made from never dirtied, and they were suitable for all occasions. I laced them up. Because I'd spent most of the last day and a half outside training, when I quickly checked my reflection in the looking glass above the wash basin, I saw the sun had changed my complexion slightly to a deep, earthy brown. I smoothed a hand over my cheek and smiled. I'd always loved that my skin was almost the same color as the rich soil of the garden. Trepidation served in the pit of my gut as I again thought about the marriage reading. I closed my eyes, trying to ease the tension, then looked my reflection straight on, my green eyes resolute. I focused and set my jaw, my features a facade of bravery. "It will be fine," I said softly. I took a breath and deemed myself presentable. As I rushed down the curved corridor of the palace, I spotted Jevon's tall form leaning against a wall. He shook his head, jokingly reprimanding me for my near lateness. The strain I felt relieved slightly. I didn't have time to stop, so I settled for sticking my tongue out at him, then grinning apprehensively as I passed. I hoped it would be him. At the arched entrance to the throne room, I slowed. My father was there, waiting to go in. He glanced up. The waist-length black dreadlocks that hung from his head were tidy. Usually one or two would hang in front of his face, but they didn't today. He wore a robe of deep blue instead of the silver one worn as Master Gardener. His face was set in neutrality. This, combined with the absence of painted teal symbols covering his sharp cheeks and wrinkled forehead, made him strangely dull. I walked the remaining distance, gulping. My mouth seemed too dry. The whole of the court was inside the hall. I'd long underestimated the importance of being matched. The apprentice gardener was almost level status-wise with the prince or princess, both of whom were sitting at the far end of the hall behind the court reader, looking bored. The prince was slouching in his chair, and the princess uninterestedly examined the embroidery snaking over her violet dress. Their mother sat between them, her golden crown shining atop smooth, midnight black hair. She was still until she spotted me. Then she sat up straighter and stared unflinchingly. Her glistening, tawny eyes urged me to the reader's table. I guess she was anxious for the reading to begin. Whomever I was matched with today would become a part of our family, not becoming a keeper of the garden themselves, but allowed to learn many of the secrets held within. Whispers and mumbles died away as I made my way to the center table. The court reader was on the other side, poised on a low cylindrical stool. My father faded away from my side into the crowd. No one except immediate family would normally come to these readings, but my fate would affect the well-being of us all. If the great tree of the garden wasn't properly cared for and nourished, it could wreak havoc on Crestalon, perhaps further. It was believed that the great tree was the heart of the ring of islands that comprised our kingdom. It protected us from all devastation and ill luck. The keepers of the garden were as important and powerful as the king or queen or king, and the court reader, in front of me now, was the final authority concerning palace decisions. Everyone worked together to lead our country. I eyed the gathered crowd, finding craning necks and squinting eyes. I guessed they were trying to spot my feminine features. Then there was Jevon's resolute face, his lips pulled tighter than usual. His presence helped me continue forward to the court reader. I set my shoulders back, walking boldly to the low table. The reader sat behind, then kneeled. To the low table the reader sat behind, then kneeled and bowed my head. "Shaylight," the court reader spoke with a rasp. I raised my eyes to him. Wisps of white hair and sagging dull skin swathed and softened the protruding bones of his face. He wore a silver blue robe loosely. Notched sticks were lined up on the table between us, each one representing an eligible bachelor. The number for each boy had been drawn at random before the ceremony. The court reader motioned for me to come to his side. I rose and obeyed. "Please kneel." I did, and he raised a thin hand to my forehead. It felt cool, dry, and smelled slightly of pastry, perhaps from his breakfast. Lowering his hand, he began to move the sticks on the table, eyes closed. Finally, his hand stopped above one, and he nodded vigorously. The other hand dropped from my forehead, and he motioned for me to take my seat. I did so, descending toward a stool identical to his own, and nearly missed it, anxious for the answer that would shape the rest of my life. Gazing at the stick, his eyes widened slightly at the number of notches. It had 3. Of course, because the numbers were matched with people at random, the number itself had no meaning. Who was it? I gulped and glanced at the prince. He was one of the boys still unmatched. It must not be him. I wouldn't stand for it if it was him. The court reader raised the stick above his head. "The apprentice gardener, Shaylight, has been matched." Everyone was deadly silent. The reader waited a few moments. "Shaylight is matched with no one." My stomach dropped away. The room fell somehow into a deeper, stunned silence. "She has been deemed," the court reader continued, "a wild soul, and will not be matched with anyone." My heart seemed to soar upwards, the heavy weight of apprehension melting away. I didn't have to marry anyone. I liked Jevon, but if I was honest in my heart, I didn't want to marry him. Mutterings started up around me now, angry and confused. The queen rose and swept coolly over to the table, her pearlescent dress skimming the floor. "You must do the reading again," she said softly to the reader. "She needs to be matched. Without a match, her family will end, and so will the garden." The court reader ignored her, stood up, and walked out of the hall. He knew his job, and that had been done. It was forbidden to do a reading twice. I didn't know that not being matched had been an option. I was free, but it would certainly cause trouble. Searching the crowd gathered to my right, I found my father. He was staring angrily downward. I'd certainly disappointed him. The Queen's face was at a loss as she watched the court reader exit. I'm sure she had known I couldn't be reread. Her eyes stirred agitatedly in thought, though, and a moment later I could see she had an answer. She cleared her throat. So, Shaylight, the apprentice gardener, has been deemed a wild soul. This cannot be changed, but the keepers of the garden must live on after her. Therefore, we must appoint another apprentice in the hope their offspring will continue the garden's lineage. Unease crept back in, and I felt my brow gather worriedly. Another apprentice? The voices around me rose. No one outside of our family had ever been allowed to be a keeper of the garden. It was passed down the same way as the kingdom. We were born to tend the garden and keep its secrets. I didn't know what would happen if we deferred from tradition. The Queen made her way back to the throne, deep in thought as those surrounding me began to murmur. My father had left. I couldn't find him amongst the gathered court. He would most likely go to the garden. Perhaps I should talk to him about what had happened. I used that thought as a reason to excuse myself without a word, returning to my room. I donned my bright green apprentice robe and painted the symbols of the garden onto my face. Dipping my fingers into the pot of paint, my mind drifted to the new apprentice. Who would it be? Was there protocol for this situation? I stared into my own eyes reflected in the mirror. My duties in the garden would certainly change. I supposed I would become a bit of a master gardener myself, training the new apprentice. Perhaps this wasn't a bad thing. Voices echoed up the hallway as I left my room, and I soon ran into the prince and a group of boys accompanying him. They paused in the middle of the hallway and ceased talking when they spotted me. I veered to the farthest side of the walkway, wanting to avoid him. It seemed Fedrid was looking to stir up a fight. He slinked across to me, blocking the way forward. I didn't meet eyes, but tried to move to his left. He dove back in front of me. I looked up, angered. Fedrid, if you would be so kind as to move, I'm needed in the garden. His eyes danced. You won't be needed there much longer. Idiot. Fedrid, move. He swept back elegantly and dropped into a low bow. As you wish, my lady, was it? He raised his head, demonic blue eyes glinting. I'm sorry. It's just not easy to tell. What was his problem? I knew punching him in the face wasn't the answer, but it didn't stop me from thinking how satisfying it would be. No, I'd learned my lesson about acting that way. Clenching my jaw, I tried to continue. Fedrid stood back up quickly and shoved his shoulder into mine. Jeering rose behind me, but I kept moving. I never did make it to the garden that day. Meeting people on the way who, through spiteful looks or laughter, made me realize I wasn't ready to face the inevitable shame that would come with seeing my father. I'd gone to the garden just a few days before, a time that seemed so long ago now, so I didn't have to be back for almost 2 weeks. Instead, I chose to go where I could restore myself, the ocean. The muted sweeping of the waves coursed through the air as the sun shone enthusiastically on white sands. I felt my stress flee immediately. Exhaling, I lay down on the powdery beach and took a moment to close my eyes and focus on my breath. I hadn't meditated at all today, and that always interrupted any calm I could have hoped for. On a day like today, with so many unexpected happenings, that had certainly been a mistake. Calming energy infused my tired body, and I felt the retreat and roll of the waters before me. The measured rhythm was soothing. Feeling a little better, I sat up and focused on the clear, gem-like water. A velvety breeze tangled around me, upsetting the heat of the sun, which seemed determined to seep into my skin. The strip of sand to my left was deserted. In the distance, I could see silhouettes of ships floating in the harbor. "Shay!" A call came from my right, and I turned to see Jevin walking through the waves, toiling back toward shore in a drenched tunic. I raised a hand to him. I wasn't really feeling up to talking to anyone, but at least it was him. "So," he sat next to me. "No one?" I shrugged and tried to smile. "I'm a wild soul, Jevin, not to be tied down." Rivulets of water skimmed down his deeply brown skin and were nestled in the short dreadlocks covering his head. They glistened in the sun. "I wouldn't have expected a new apprentice to be the solution. I'm the heir of our family. If I can't continue the line, there's really no other solution. I can't think of another answer." Jevin nodded. "That is true." I rubbed my hands over my face and fixed my eyes on the horizon in front of us. Jevin shifted beside me. "Who do you think it will be?" I paused, thinking. "The rules for this type of situation haven't been used. I know it's written down how to choose the new apprentice if it must be done, but I don't remember how." I sighed. "My father will be taking care of it, I'm sure." Jevin pulled his knees close to his chest. "I'm glad I wasn't matched, though." I scooped a handful of sand into my palm and shifted it unconcernedly. "With everyone just now realizing I'm a girl, I think it would have been difficult for me and a prospective match to overcome that." Time sifted by slowly. Then Jevin asked a hesitating question. "Why didn't you tell any of us?" I let the rest of the sand seep out through my fingers. "Honestly, I didn't think it mattered. I'm not going to change anything. It was easier to live as a boy and more fun. All of the girls do embroidery, have long, heavy hair, wear uncomfortable-looking clothes, and are shut up inside for most of the day." A breeze skittered across the sand before us. "I used to think they liked it, and I was just different in wanting to do what the boys did. I wonder if they're unhappy with their circumstances." I brushed my hands together. "Why does this small part of ourselves determine how we have to live our whole lives?" Jevin didn't answer. I suspected there wasn't one. I lay down on the beach and closed my eyes, listening to the waves brush the sand. My thoughts were too dense to sort through, so I let them wash away. Jevin stayed quietly beside me for a while, but then headed back to the palace. As one of the assistants to the royal family, he would have to help them get ready for dinner. I wasn't usually required to be at the evening meal in the banquet hall, so I went to the kitchen pantry after resting for a while and snagged some smoked fish, sea greens, and a small jug of spiel fruit tea to eat in my room. Save the guards, I didn't meet a soul as I rambled down the corridor. Most of my food was gone by the time I got to the room. I sat at the desk against my wall, finished the small meal, then went to the bookshelf to look for a particular tome. I did wonder how the new apprentice would be chosen. There were many people in the palace that would be wrong for the position. The stout volume was bound in glazed and stitched leaves. I pulled it from its place and cracked it open. Tree care, ritual watering, no. I flipped through the pages. I remembered the section. It was somewhere in the second half of the book. Finally, I found the heading I needed. Tradition and choosing from beyond the keepers. A couple pages over was the section I needed. I skimmed it quickly. With the cease of the original keepers, either through death or an inability to continue the line, the newest keeper will be chosen as follows. All orphans from the age of 10 to 25 residing in the palace, either noble or servant, shall be gathered and counted. The reader of the court shall follow the practice of a traditional matching ceremony. In place of a woman, they will use the great tree herself. In place of the bachelors, the orphans. Whichever one is matched as being bound with the tree shall follow in the footsteps of previous keepers and continue the line as long as they and their offspring are able. It always came down to the court reader. Chance had the greatest power in court, it seemed. I assumed the new apprentice would be chosen soon. There were a few people whom I knew now were out of the running because their parents were alive and well. That was some consolation. I placed the book back on the shelf and went to the washroom. A smile stretched my face as I caught my reflection in the looking glass. I still had the teal painted symbols on my face. Pouring a stream of water from a pitcher into the clay wash basin before me, I scrubbed until the hushed, deep tones of my face gleamed in the lamplight of the washroom, and the water was tinted a greenish blue. The liquid in the clay bowl swirled and attempted escape as I brought it to the window, tipping the colored water onto some wildflowers growing below. I closed my eyes and stood still for a moment, breathing in the fragrant evening air. It was almost summer, and the coastal breeze mingled harmoniously with the scent of flowers and fresh leaves. In the distance, I heard the steady rush of waves, then the soft beat of wings as a bird hurried home. The sky was a rusted orange near its base, where the sun had gone down not long ago, and the first white pinpricks of stars were appearing out of nowhere, without commotion. It had been a warm day, so I decided to leave the window open, letting the delicate sounds and soothing smells accompany my sleep. Slumber took me as soon as I lay down. So that was chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you guys are doing well. I'll keep uploading more chapters for you. Have a good one. Bye.